The storm clouds gathered thick and dark over the remote military training facility in the mountains of Colorado. Rain hammered against the windows of the command center where Colonel Marcus Hayes stood reviewing personnel files. The weather matched his mood perfectly as he prepared to make one of the most difficult decisions of his career. Sarah Mitchell sat in the small waiting room outside his office, her uniform perfectly pressed despite the chaos of the past 24 hours. Her hands remained steady on her knees, a habit developed through countless hours of sniper training where stillness meant survival. At 28 years old, she had already earned recognition as one of the military's most skilled marksmen, but recognition meant nothing when politics entered the picture. The door opened with a sharp click. Colonel Hayes emerged, his expression unreadable. Behind him followed 3 other officers, their faces showing a mixture of discomfort and resignation. Sarah stood at attention, her green eyes meeting the colonel's gaze without flinching. "Sergeant Mitchell," Colonel Hayes began, his voice carrying the weight of reluctant authority. "Please step into my office." The room felt smaller than usual as Sarah entered. The walls displayed decades of military history, photographs of successful operations, and commendations from grateful nations. Soon, her own achievements would be packed away and forgotten, victims of circumstances beyond her control. Colonel Hayes closed the door and gestured for her to sit. He remained standing, looking out the window at the storm that showed no signs of letting up. Lightning illuminated the mountainside, casting brief shadows across his weathered face. "Sarah," he said, using her first name for the first time in years. "What happened in Syria was not your fault." The words hung in the air between them. Both knew the truth of what had occurred during the classified mission 3 weeks earlier. Sarah had followed orders precisely, eliminated the target as instructed, and saved the lives of 12 captured civilians. The mission had been a complete success by every military standard that mattered. "Sir, I understand the political situation," Sarah replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "The target had connections we didn't know about. His death created complications." Colonel Hayes turned from the window, his expression showing the frustration he felt with the entire situation. "Complications. That's what they're calling it now. A corrupt arms dealer who was selling weapons to terrorists becomes a martyr because he happened to be someone's cousin. The official report would state that Sergeant Sarah Mitchell had acted without proper authorization. The truth would remain classified, buried in files that few people would ever see. Political pressure from foreign allies demanded a scapegoat, and Sarah's superiors had chosen the path of least resistance. "The brass wants someone to blame," Colonel Hayes continued. "They need to show our allies that we take responsibility for complications. Your record is exemplary. Your skills are unmatched. But none of that matters when diplomats start making demands." Sarah had expected this moment since returning from Syria. She had watched the news reports, seen the protests, observed the subtle changes in how her fellow soldiers treated her. The whispers in the hallways, the avoided eye contact, the sudden silence when she entered a room. All signs pointing to this inevitable conclusion. "What are my options, sir?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Colonel Hayes picked up a folder from his desk, its contents representing the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. Resignation with full benefits, honorable discharge, and a clean record. Officially, you're leaving to pursue civilian opportunities. Unofficially, you're being sacrificed to keep the peace. The offer was generous considering the circumstances. Many soldiers in similar situations faced court-martial or worse. Sarah understood the colonel's position and appreciated his efforts to protect her as much as possible. "How long do I have to decide?" she asked. "The paperwork is already being processed. You have tonight to clear out your quarters and say your goodbyes. A transport will take you to Denver tomorrow morning." Sarah stood and saluted, her movements crisp and professional despite the emotional weight of the moment. "Thank you for everything, sir. It's been an honor serving under your command." Colonel Hayes returned the salute, his own emotions carefully controlled. "The honor has been mine, Sergeant. You're one of the finest soldiers I've ever had the privilege to work with." As Sarah turned to leave, the colonel spoke once more. "Sarah, this isn't the end of your story. Sometimes the best soldiers find their true calling outside the traditional structure. Don't let this define you." The walk back to her quarters felt longer than usual. The storm had intensified, forcing her to hurry across the open spaces between buildings. Other soldiers she passed offered polite nods, but nothing more. Word had already spread through the base, as it always did in tight-knit military communities. Her room was sparse, containing only the essential items accumulated during 8 years of service. Photographs of family, awards, and commendations, personal gear that had saved her life countless times in hostile territories. Each item told a story of dedication, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to duty. The phone rang as she began packing. The caller ID showed her younger brother's name. David worked as a paramedic in Seattle, far removed from the military world that had shaped Sarah's adult life. Their conversations had become less frequent as their paths diverged, but family bonds remained strong despite the distance. "Hey, big sister." David's voice carried its usual cheerfulness. "Just calling to check in. How are things at the base?" Sarah paused, holding a framed photo of their parents who had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. How could she explain that her military career was ending in disgrace? How could she tell him that everything she had worked for was being swept away by political convenience? "Things are changing, David. I might be coming home sooner than expected." "Really? That's great. I know you love the military, but maybe it's time for something new. You could always join the fire department or police force. They'd be lucky to have someone with your skills." His optimism was infectious, even in her darkest moment. David had always seen the best in every situation, a trait that made him excellent at his job and a source of strength for their small family. "Maybe," Sarah replied. "I haven't figured out what comes next yet." "Well, you know you always have a place to stay here. Seattle's expensive, but my couch is free, and I make excellent coffee." After ending the call, Sarah continued packing with renewed purpose. Her military career might be ending, but her skills and dedication remained intact. 8 years of training, multiple deployments, and countless successful missions had shaped her into something more than just a soldier. The storm outside seemed to be weakening as she packed the last of her belongings. Thunder still rolled across the mountains, but the lightning had become less frequent. Weather in Colorado changed quickly, and what seemed like the end of the world one moment could transform into clear skies the next. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Captain Jennifer Walsh entered, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee and wearing the expression of someone delivering difficult news. Jennifer had been Sarah's closest friend on the base, another female soldier navigating the challenges of military life in a male-dominated environment. "Thought you might need this," Jennifer said, offering one of the cups. They sat together on Sarah's narrow bed, surrounded by boxes and the remnants of a military career. Jennifer had been present during the Syria briefings and knew the truth about what had happened. Her support meant everything during this difficult transition. "This is complete bullshit," Jennifer said, her voice filled with anger. "You saved those civilians. You followed orders. You did everything right." Sarah sipped her coffee, appreciating both the warmth and the friendship. Sometimes doing everything right isn't enough. Politics trumps performance, and someone has to take the fall. "Where will you go?" "Seattle, probably. My brother lives there, and it's far enough away to start fresh." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "You know, there are opportunities out there for someone with your skills. Private security, law enforcement, even civilian contractor work. The military's loss will be someone else's gain. Right now, I just want to disappear for a while. Figure out who I am without the uniform." They talked for another hour, sharing memories of training exercises, successful missions, and the camaraderie that made military life bearable despite its hardships. Jennifer promised to stay in touch, though both knew how difficult it would be to maintain friendships across the civilian-military divide. The next morning arrived gray and cloudy, but the storm had passed. Sarah stood outside the base entrance with her duffel bag and a single box of personal items. The transport to Denver idled nearby, its driver checking his watch impatiently. Colonel Hayes appeared for a final goodbye, his presence both comforting and painful. He handed her a sealed envelope containing her discharge papers and a letter of recommendation that carefully avoided mentioning the Syria incident. "Remember what I told you," he said quietly. "This isn't the end of your story." The drive to Denver took 3 hours through winding mountain roads. Sarah watched the landscape change from military precision to civilian chaos, from order to uncertainty. The city appeared gradually, sprawling across the horizon like a promise of new possibilities. At the airport, she called David to confirm her arrival time in Seattle. His excitement was genuine, and, for the first time in weeks, she felt a spark of hope about the future. Whatever came next, she would face it with the same determination that had carried her through 8 years of military service. The flight to Seattle was smooth, giving her time to think about her next steps. The pilot announced their descent as the city came into view, surrounded by water and mountains that reminded her of Colorado. Somewhere below, a new chapter was beginning. David waited at the baggage claim, his paramedic uniform wrinkled from a long shift. His smile was infectious as he pulled her into a bear hug that lasted longer than usual. Brothers always seemed to know when extra support was needed without requiring explanations. "Welcome home, Sarah. Whatever brought you here, we'll figure it out together." As they drove through Seattle's busy streets, Sarah observed the controlled chaos of civilian life. People hurried along sidewalks, focused on their own concerns, unaware of the military operations that protected their daily routines. The contrast was stark, but not unwelcoming. David's apartment was small, but comfortable, located in a neighborhood that balanced affordability with safety. The spare bedroom was barely large enough for a bed and dresser, but it represented freedom from the rigid structure of military barracks. "It's not much," David apologized, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." "It's perfect," Sarah replied, meaning every word. That evening, they sat on David's small balcony overlooking the city lights. Seattle bustled below them, millions of lives intersecting in ways both random and purposeful. Sarah felt simultaneously invisible and liberated, just another person among many rather than a soldier under constant scrutiny. "So what really happened?" David asked gently. Sarah considered how much to reveal. Military secrecy was still ingrained in her thinking, but David deserved some explanation for her sudden appearance in his life. "I did my job too well," she said finally. "Sometimes success creates more problems than failure. The brass needed someone to blame for political complications, and I was convenient." David nodded without pressing for details. His work as a paramedic had taught him that people shared what they were ready to share when they were ready to share it. Pushing too hard often caused more harm than good. "Well, their loss is Seattle's gain," he said. "This city could use more people with your skills and integrity." Over the following weeks, Sarah began adjusting to civilian life. She explored the city, familiarized herself with public transportation, and slowly shed the hypervigilance that had kept her alive in combat zones. The process was gradual, but necessary. Job hunting proved more challenging than expected. Her military experience translated well to certain positions, but many employers seemed uncertain about hiring former soldiers. Some worried about PTSD, others questioned her ability to function in corporate environments. The rejections were polite, but consistent. One morning, while reading job listings at a coffee shop near David's apartment, Sarah overheard a conversation at the next table. Two men in business suits were discussing security concerns for their company's overseas operations. Their conversation revealed sophisticated understanding of international threats and high-level security requirements. "Excuse me," Sarah interrupted politely. "I couldn't help overhearing your discussion about security challenges. I might have some relevant experience." The older man looked skeptical until Sarah outlined her military background and specialized training. His attitude shifted quickly as he realized her potential value. By the end of their conversation, she had a business card and an appointment for an interview the following week. The company, International Risk Solutions, provided security consulting for corporations operating in dangerous regions. Sarah's combination of tactical skills, cultural knowledge, and language abilities made her an ideal candidate for their team. The interview went exceptionally well. The company president, a former CIA operative named Michael Torres, recognized her value immediately. Within days, she had a job offer that included competitive salary, travel opportunities, and the chance to use her skills in meaningful ways. "We need people like you," Torres explained during her first day orientation. "The world is getting more dangerous, and our clients need protection from professionals who understand real threats." Sarah's first assignment involved assessing security vulnerabilities for a mining company operating in South America. The work combined analytical thinking with practical experience, allowing her to contribute meaningfully while earning respect from her new colleagues. Months passed quickly as she established herself in the private security sector. The work was challenging and rewarding, though sometimes she missed the camaraderie and clear mission focus of military service. Corporate objectives lacked the moral clarity of protecting innocent civilians, but the job provided stability and purpose. One evening, while reviewing intelligence reports for an upcoming assignment, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the voice belonged to Colonel Hayes. "Sarah, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I have something important to discuss with you." "Of course, sir. How did you get this number?" "Military networks run deeper than you might think. I've been following your progress in the private sector, and I'm impressed with what you've accomplished." Sarah was puzzled by his tone, which suggested more than casual interest in her civilian career. "Thank you, sir. The transition has been challenging, but worthwhile." "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to consider it carefully before responding. How would you feel about returning to military service under very specific circumstances?" The question caught her completely off guard. After everything that had happened, the possibility of returning seemed impossible. Yet Colonel Hayes was not someone who made frivolous suggestions. "I'm not sure I understand, sir. My discharge was permanent. Circumstances change, Sarah. New threats require new approaches, and sometimes the best solutions come from outside traditional channels. I can't discuss details over the phone, but I'd like to arrange a meeting if you're interested." Sarah's mind raced with possibilities and concerns. The military had discarded her when political convenience demanded sacrifice. Why would they want her back now? What had changed in the months since her departure? "Where and when?" she asked. "There's a coffee shop called Mountain View Cafe in downtown Denver. Thursday afternoon at 3 o'clock. Come alone, and don't mention this conversation to anyone." The call ended abruptly, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. She stared at her phone for several minutes, trying to process the unexpected development. Military life had taught her to expect the unexpected, but this was beyond anything she could have anticipated. The rest of the week passed slowly as she wrestled with curiosity and caution. Colonel Hayes had always been straightforward in his dealings with her, but the circumstances of her departure had created trust issues that wouldn't be easily resolved. Thursday morning, Sarah called in sick to work and caught an early flight to Denver. The familiar mountain landscape looked different now, viewed from the perspective of a civilian rather than a soldier. The sense of homecoming was complicated by uncertainty about what lay ahead. Mountain View Cafe was exactly what its name suggested, a small establishment with large windows overlooking the Rocky Mountains. Sarah arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a table that provided clear sight lines to all entrances. Old habits died hard, even in civilian environments. Colonel Hayes entered precisely at 3 o'clock, dressed in civilian clothes that couldn't quite hide his military bearing. He spotted her immediately and approached with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you for coming, Sarah. I wasn't sure you would." "Curiosity won over caution," she replied. "But I'm here as a civilian, not a soldier." "Understood. What I'm about to tell you is highly classified, but your security clearance was never officially revoked. Sometimes bureaucratic oversight works in our favor." Sarah leaned forward slightly, her full attention focused on his words. Whatever had prompted this meeting was clearly significant, possibly more important than anything she had encountered during her military career. 3 weeks ago, a Navy SEAL team was captured during a classified operation in Southeast Asia. Intelligence suggests they're being held at a location that conventional rescue operations cannot reach safely. The political situation makes official military action impossible. Sarah felt a familiar surge of adrenaline, the same feeling that had driven her through 8 years of military service. Someone needed help, and conventional solutions weren't working. This was exactly the type of challenge that had drawn her to the military in the first place. "What does this have to do with me?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "We need someone who can operate independently, someone with your specific skills, and someone who officially doesn't exist in our current force structure. The mission would be completely off the books, with full deniability if things go wrong. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same military that had thrown her away was now asking for her help when traditional approaches failed. Yet the thought of captured SEALs facing torture or execution overrode any personal resentment she might feel. Why me specifically? There are other qualified people available. Colonel Hayes smiled grimly. Because you're the best sniper we've ever trained, because you've operated successfully in similar environments, and because you have nothing left to lose. Most importantly, because I trust you to get the job done regardless of personal cost. Sarah considered the implications carefully. Accepting would mean abandoning her new civilian life and returning to the world that had rejected her. Refusing would mean leaving fellow soldiers to whatever fate awaited them in enemy hands. I need details before I can decide anything. Fair enough. The operation would involve insertion into hostile territory, reconnaissance, target elimination, and extraction of personnel under combat conditions. Standard duration would be 72 hours maximum, but circumstances might extend that timeline. Rules of engagement? Whatever is necessary to complete the mission and bring our people home safely. You would have complete operational authority and access to any resources required. Sarah stared out the window at the mountains that had been her home for so many years. Somewhere beyond those peaks, American soldiers were counting on rescue that might never come through official channels. The decision was really no decision at all. When do we start planning? Colonel Hayes' smile was the first genuine expression she had seen from him since her discharge. We start now. There's a secure facility about an hour from here where you can review intelligence and begin preparations. Are you ready to be a soldier again? I never stopped being a soldier, sir. I just temporarily misplaced my purpose. As they left the cafe together, Sarah felt a familiar sense of homecoming that had nothing to do with geography and everything to do with mission. The storm that had driven her from military service was finally beginning to clear, revealing new possibilities on the horizon. The secure facility was hidden in an unmarked building that could have been any corporate office complex. Inside, however, the atmosphere was unmistakably military. Maps, satellite photos, and intelligence reports covered every available surface, creating a comprehensive picture of the challenge ahead. Sarah spent the next 6 hours absorbing information about the target area, studying terrain features, weather patterns, and enemy capabilities. The captured SEAL team had been conducting reconnaissance when they were betrayed by a local contact. Their current location was a heavily fortified compound in mountainous terrain that presented significant challenges for conventional rescue operations. The insertion will be via halo jump from 30,000 feet, Colonel Hayes explained, pointing to topographical maps. You'll have approximately 48 hours before enemy reinforcements arrive from nearby military installations. Support assets? Minimal. One helicopter for extraction if conditions permit, but you'll be operating primarily alone. Communication will be limited to emergency frequencies only. Sarah nodded, already formulating preliminary plans based on the intelligence available. The mission was dangerous, but not impossible, requiring exactly the type of skills she had developed during her military career. Equipment, whatever you need. Weapons, surveillance gear, communications, explosives. No restrictions or limitations. As evening approached, Sarah felt the familiar pre-mission focus settling over her mind. Civilian concerns faded into background noise as tactical considerations took priority. She was returning to the world she understood best, where clear objectives and decisive action mattered more than political complications. When do I deploy? Tomorrow night. That gives us 24 hours to finalize preparations and brief you on any last-minute intelligence developments. Sarah looked around the room one final time, absorbing details that might prove crucial during the operation. Somewhere in the mountains of a hostile nation, American soldiers were waiting for rescue that depended entirely on her skills and determination. Then, let's get to work, sir. We have people to bring home. The transformation from discarded soldier to critical mission asset was complete. Whatever had happened in Syria was now irrelevant compared to the task ahead. Sarah Mitchell was going back to war, and this time she would be fighting entirely on her own terms. The C-130 transport aircraft flew through the night at 30,000 feet, its engines creating a steady drone that masked the sound of final preparations taking place in the cargo bay. Sarah Mitchell checked her equipment one final time, running through the mental checklist that had kept her alive through countless dangerous missions. Her gear was state-of-the-art, carefully selected for the specific challenges of this operation. The sniper rifle was a custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum with advanced optics and sound suppression. Additional equipment included night vision goggles, communications gear, climbing equipment, and enough ammunition to handle extended combat operations. The jumpmaster approached, his voice barely audible over the aircraft noise. 5 minutes to drop zone. Weather conditions are optimal, winds minimal. You'll have clear skies for the descent. Sarah stood and performed final equipment checks with practiced efficiency. Every strap, buckle, and connection was verified twice. In high-altitude operations, equipment failure meant certain death, and there would be no opportunity for corrections once she left the aircraft. 2 minutes. The cargo bay door began opening, revealing the vast darkness of night sky over hostile territory. Cold air rushed through the cabin as atmospheric pressure equalized. Below, enemy forces held 4 American soldiers whose lives depended entirely on the success of this unauthorized mission. 1 minute. Sarah moved to the jump door, her mind already focused on the tactical situation awaiting her on the ground. Intelligence reports indicated the captured SEALs were being held in a compound built into the mountainside, heavily defended, and accessible only through narrow mountain passes that made conventional rescue impossible. Go! She stepped into the void without hesitation, falling through the darkness toward an uncertain outcome. The first 30 seconds were pure freefall, her body accelerating until terminal velocity was reached. At 20,000 feet, she deployed her parachute and began the controlled descent toward her target area. The landscape below gradually became visible as her altitude decreased. Rugged mountains stretched in every direction, their peaks catching starlight that provided minimal illumination. The enemy compound was invisible from this altitude, but Sarah had memorized its location from satellite photographs studied during mission planning. Landing was accomplished in a small clearing approximately 2 miles from the target. Sarah immediately buried her parachute and began movement toward the observation position she had selected from aerial reconnaissance photos. Every step was calculated to minimize noise and avoid detection by enemy patrols. The approach took 4 hours of careful movement through difficult terrain. Sarah used natural cover and darkness to avoid detection, stopping frequently to listen for sounds that might indicate enemy presence. Her training in covert operations proved invaluable as she navigated obstacles that would have stopped less experienced operators. Dawn was still 2 hours away when she reached the observation position overlooking the enemy compound. The facility was exactly as intelligence had described. A fortified structure built into the mountainside with natural protection on 3 sides and carefully constructed defensive positions covering all approaches. Through her spotting scope, Sarah could see guard positions, weapon emplacements, and patrol patterns that hadn't been visible in satellite imagery. The compound held approximately 30 enemy fighters, all well-armed and clearly experienced in mountain warfare. Getting inside undetected would require perfect timing and exceptional skill. The captured SEALs were likely being held in the underground section of the compound, accessible only through the main entrance or a small ventilation shaft that intelligence had identified during photo analysis. Both options presented significant challenges, but the ventilation system offered the best opportunity for covert entry. Sarah spent the next 6 hours conducting detailed surveillance, mapping guard rotations, identifying weapon positions, and calculating distances for potential sniper shots. The enemy was disciplined and professional, rotating guards every 2 hours and maintaining constant radio communication with external security positions. As afternoon approached, she observed increased activity around the compound. Additional vehicles arrived carrying more personnel, and radio intercepts suggested that high-ranking officials were coming to interrogate the American prisoners. Time was running out for a covert rescue operation. The plan that emerged from her observations was complex but achievable. Sarah would wait until darkness, then eliminate key sentries with precision shots before infiltrating through the ventilation system. Once inside, she would locate the prisoners, neutralize any guards, and guide the SEALs to an extraction point where helicopter pickup might be possible. Execution would require perfect timing and flawless marksmanship. Any mistake would alert the entire compound and turn a rescue mission into a suicide assault. Sarah had faced similar challenges during her military career, but never while operating completely alone and without backup support. As darkness fell, she began the final approach to the compound perimeter. Movement was slow and deliberate, taking advantage of natural cover and shadows to avoid detection. Each step was planned in advance, with fallback positions identified in case retreat became necessary. The first target was a sentry positioned at the main gate, approximately 300 yards from her concealed position. Through her rifle scope, Sarah could see the guard's routine, checking his radio every 10 minutes, smoking cigarettes at 15-minute intervals, and occasionally walking a short patrol along the compound wall. At precisely midnight, she squeezed the trigger. The suppressed rifle made barely any sound as the bullet traveled across the distance in less than half a second. The sentry collapsed silently, his radio falling from lifeless hands before he could raise any alarm. 2 more guards required elimination before she could approach the ventilation shaft. Both shots were made from different positions to avoid revealing her location. The compound's defenders remained unaware that their perimeter had been compromised. The ventilation shaft was located exactly where intelligence had indicated, hidden behind a cluster of rocks on the compound's north side. The opening was barely large enough for a person to crawl through, but it provided access to the underground areas where prisoners were likely held. Sarah's infiltration through the ventilation system took nearly an hour of careful movement through narrow passages. Her equipment had to be pushed ahead of her as she crawled through spaces never intended for human travel. Any sound would echo through the metal ducting and alert guards to her presence. The shaft opened into a maintenance area adjacent to the main underground corridor. Sarah emerged silently, immediately assessing the layout and identifying potential threats. The underground section was poorly lit, providing excellent concealment for her movements. Voices speaking in the local language echoed from deeper in the complex. Sarah moved toward the sounds, using shadows and alcoves to avoid detection. Her night vision equipment allowed her to navigate effectively while remaining invisible to guards who relied on traditional lighting. The first prisoner's cell was empty, but sounds from further down the corridor indicated the presence of multiple people. Sarah approached carefully, identifying 2 guards stationed outside a heavy wooden door. Beyond the door, she could hear American voices speaking in low tones. Eliminating the guards required careful timing to prevent either one from raising an alarm. Sarah waited until both men were distracted by their conversation before moving into position. 2 swift, silent strikes ended their threat permanently. The cell door was secured with a heavy bar that required both strength and stealth to remove without creating noise. Inside, she found all 4 missing SEALs, battered but alive and alert despite their ordeal. They recognized her immediately as American military despite her civilian clothing. "Who sent you?" whispered Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez, the team leader. "Colonel Hayes. We're getting you out of here," Sarah replied softly. "How many people in your team?" asked another SEAL. "Just me. We need to move fast and quiet. Can everyone walk?" The SEALs were bruised and exhausted but still capable of movement. Their captors had focused on interrogation rather than physical incapacitation, leaving them injured but functional. All 4 confirmed they could handle the demands of an escape operation. Sarah quickly outlined her extraction plan while distributing weapons taken from the eliminated guards. The route back through the ventilation system was impossible with 4 additional people, requiring them to fight their way out through the main compound. "Stay close, follow my lead, and don't shoot unless absolutely necessary," she instructed. "Our best chance is reaching the extraction point before they realize what's happening." The escape began smoothly as they moved through underground corridors toward the main exit. Sarah's knowledge of guard positions and patrol patterns allowed them to avoid contact initially, but discovery became inevitable as they approached ground level. The first alarm was raised by a guard who discovered the bodies at the prisoner cell. Radio chatter erupted throughout the compound as enemy forces realized their prisoners had escaped. Floodlights illuminated the compound grounds as searchers began systematic sweeps of all areas. Sarah led the SEALs through a series of defensive positions, using her intimate knowledge of the compound layout to stay ahead of pursuing forces. Her sniper rifle eliminated threats at long range while the rescued soldiers handled closer enemies with captured weapons. The running battle continued for 20 minutes as they fought their way toward the extraction point. Enemy reinforcements arrived from nearby positions, increasing the pressure on the small American team. Sarah's marksmanship proved decisive in several critical engagements. Helicopter approaching from the south, Rodriguez reported, monitoring radio traffic on captured equipment. The extraction aircraft was still 5 minutes away when enemy forces launched a coordinated assault on their position. Sarah and the SEALs were forced to defend a small outcropping of rocks against overwhelming numbers while waiting for pickup. "How many rounds left?" Sarah asked during a brief lull in the fighting. "Running low on everything," came the collective response. Enemy forces were closing from 3 sides when the helicopter finally appeared over the mountain ridge. The pilot immediately engaged hostile positions with mounted weapons while maneuvering for pickup in the narrow landing zone. "Go, go, go," Sarah shouted over the aircraft noise. The SEALs ran for the helicopter while Sarah provided covering fire with her remaining ammunition. Enemy fighters pressed their attack despite heavy casualties, determined to prevent the Americans from escaping. Rodriguez reached the aircraft first, followed quickly by the other team members. Sarah was the last to reach the helicopter, diving through the door as the pilot pulled maximum power to escape the landing zone. Enemy fire followed them as they climbed toward the mountain ridge, bullets striking the aircraft's armor without penetrating. The pilot banked sharply around a mountain peak, using terrain to break enemy contact and escape to international airspace. "Jesus Christ," one of the SEALs said breathlessly. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who used to be thrown away," Sarah replied, checking her equipment for damage. The flight to safety took 2 hours over mountainous terrain that provided concealment from potential pursuit. Sarah used the time to tend to injuries and gather intelligence about enemy operations from the rescued prisoners. "They were planning to move us tomorrow," Rodriguez explained. "Someone high up wanted to interrogate us personally about our mission parameters. Any idea what they knew about your operation?" "Too much. We were compromised before we even got close to the target. Someone on our side is feeding them information." The helicopter landed at a secure airfield where medical personnel waited to examine the rescued SEALs. Sarah remained with the aircraft, officially invisible to the medical teams and debriefing specialists who swarmed around the returning prisoners. Colonel Hayes appeared as the chaos began settling down. His expression showed relief, mixed with professional satisfaction at the mission's success. 4 American soldiers were safe because of Sarah's skills and dedication, proving that sometimes unconventional solutions produce the best results. "Outstanding work," he said simply. "How do you feel about doing this again?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The mission had reminded her why she had chosen military service originally: the opportunity to protect people who couldn't protect themselves and serve something larger than personal interests. "Depends on the circumstances. I won't be your convenient scapegoat again, but I'll help when real soldiers need saving." "Fair enough. There might be other situations where your particular skills are required." "Interested in a more permanent arrangement." "What kind of arrangement?" Colonel Hayes led her away from the airfield activity toward a quiet building where they could speak privately. The facility was clearly military despite its civilian appearance, suggesting a level of operations that existed outside normal command structures. A special unit that handles situations conventional forces can't touch. You would have complete operational authority, unlimited resources, and the backing of people who understand your value. Most importantly, you'd be protected from the political games that caused problems before. The offer was tempting, but Sarah had learned to be cautious about military promises. Her previous experience had taught her that political considerations could override any guarantee of protection when circumstances changed. "I need more details before making any decisions." "Understandable. Take some time to think about it. The offer will remain open as long as you're interested." They were interrupted by Rodriguez approaching with obvious purpose. The SEAL team leader had been cleaned up and bandaged, but his expression showed the intensity that marked all special operations personnel. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you personally. What you did tonight was incredible. I've never seen anything like it." "Just doing my job," Sarah replied. "No, it was more than that. You saved our lives when everyone else had written us off. We won't forget it." After Rodriguez left, Colonel Hayes studied Sarah with the calculating look of someone evaluating assets and opportunities. Her successful rescue of 4 Navy SEALs had demonstrated capabilities that went beyond normal military parameters. "Think about what I said. The world is getting more dangerous, and we need people who can handle impossible situations. You've proven you're exactly what we need." The helicopter flight back to civilization gave Sarah time to process everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. She had gone from discarded soldier to mission-critical asset, proving her worth through actions rather than politics. Seattle appeared below them as dawn broke over the Pacific Northwest. David would be starting his shift at the fire station, unaware that his sister had spent the night conducting a classified rescue operation in hostile territory. The contrast between civilian and military worlds seemed starker than ever. The aircraft landed at a private airfield outside the city. Sarah gathered her gear and prepared to return to her temporary civilian life, though she knew that chapter was probably ending. The mission had reminded her of her true calling, and civilian employment could never provide the same sense of purpose. "How can I contact you when you've made your decision?" Colonel Hayes asked as she prepared to leave. "You found me once. I'm sure you can find me again." The taxi ride to David's apartment took her through familiar neighborhoods that looked different somehow. Streets that had seemed normal a few days ago now appeared soft and vulnerable, populated by people who had no idea how much danger existed in the world beyond their daily routines. David was cooking breakfast when she entered the apartment, his paramedic uniform indicating he was preparing for work. His greeting was cheerful and unsuspicious, exactly what she needed after the intensity of the past 2 days. "You're up early," he observed. "Or maybe you never went to sleep?" "Couldn't sleep. Went for a long walk to clear my head." It wasn't technically a lie, though the walk had involved more excitement than he could imagine. Sarah poured herself coffee and tried to readjust to the rhythm of civilian life. "Everything okay? You seem different somehow." David's perception was accurate. The mission had reminded her of who she really was beneath the civilian disguise she had constructed. Pretending to be someone else was becoming increasingly difficult. "Just thinking about career options. I might have an opportunity to return to government work." "Really? That sounds promising. Doing what?" "Consulting work. Using my military experience to help with security issues." Again, not technically false, though the full truth would have been impossible to explain. David seemed satisfied with the explanation and didn't press for additional details. "Well, whatever you decide, you know I support you. You're not meant for corporate office jobs anyway. You need something that challenges you." His insight was remarkable considering how little he knew about her recent activities. Brothers possessed an understanding that didn't require detailed explanations, which made his support even more valuable. After David left for work, Sarah sat on the balcony overlooking the city and considered her options. Returning to Colonel Hayes meant accepting that her civilian experiment had failed. Staying in Seattle meant pretending to be satisfied with corporate security consulting when her skills were needed for more critical missions. The choice was really no choice at all. 4 Navy SEALs were alive because she had been available when conventional rescue options failed. How many other soldiers were in similar situations, waiting for help that would never come through official channels? Her phone rang as she was reaching for it to call Colonel Hayes. The caller ID showed an unknown number, but military experience had taught her to answer all calls during active operations. "Sarah Mitchell." "Ms. Mitchell, this is General Patricia Morrison. I believe you know Colonel Hayes." The name was familiar from military briefings, though Sarah had never met the general personally. Morrison was known throughout special operations communities as someone who got results regardless of bureaucratic obstacles. "Yes, ma'am. I've worked with Colonel Hayes. I understand you recently completed a successful operation that saved 4 of our people. I'd like to meet with you to discuss additional opportunities." "When and where?" "Today, if possible. There's a situation developing that requires immediate attention, and you may be the only person who can handle it effectively." The civilian life experiment was officially over. Sarah was returning to the world where her skills mattered and her dedication could save lives that would otherwise be lost to political considerations and bureaucratic limitations. I'll be there. Excellent. A car will pick you up in 1 hour. Pack for extended travel to a warm climate. The call ended before Sarah could ask questions, but military operations rarely provided complete information in advance. She would learn what she needed to know when she needed to know it. Packing took 15 minutes since her civilian possessions remained minimal. A note for David explained that she had received an unexpected job offer requiring immediate travel. He would understand, even if he couldn't know the complete truth about her departure. The car arrived precisely on schedule, driven by a professional who asked no questions and provided no information about their destination. Sarah recognized the type. Former military personnel who now handled sensitive transportation for government operations that existed outside normal command structures. The drive took them to a private airfield where a military transport aircraft waited with engines running. Sarah boarded without ceremony, finding herself in a cargo bay configured for passenger transport, but clearly military in nature. General Morrison was waiting inside, her presence commanding immediate attention despite her relatively small physical stature. She possessed the aura of someone who had earned respect through decades of successful leadership in challenging circumstances. Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming. Please sit down. We have considerable ground to cover before we reach our destination. The aircraft was already taxiing as Sarah took her seat opposite the general. Maps and intelligence reports covered a small table between them, suggesting another crisis requiring unconventional solutions. Where are we going? Central Africa. American aid workers have been kidnapped by a warlord who's demanding ransom that we can't pay for policy reasons. The local government is sympathetic, but lacks the capability to mount a rescue operation. Sarah studied the materials spread before them. Satellite photos showed a remote compound in dense jungle terrain, accessible only by river or aircraft. The challenges were similar to her recent mission, but complicated by environmental factors that would test different skill sets. How many hostages? 6. 2 doctors, 3 nurses, and 1 logistics coordinator. All civilians with no military training. They've been held for 8 days, and intelligence suggests the situation is deteriorating rapidly. Timeline for the operation? 72 hours maximum. After that, political pressure will force us to negotiate publicly, which sets a precedent we can't accept. General Morrison activated a laptop computer and began displaying additional intelligence gathered through satellite surveillance and human sources. The target compound was heavily defended by local fighters who were experienced in jungle warfare, but lacked sophisticated equipment. The operation would be similar to your recent success, but environmental factors create additional complications. Jungle operations require different tactics and equipment than mountain warfare. What about extraction? Helicopter support? Limited. Weather conditions make helicopter operations difficult, and political considerations prevent us from using overwhelming force. You would be operating with minimal support and maximum deniability. The mission parameters were challenging, but not impossible. Sarah had trained in jungle environments during her military career, though most of her combat experience had been in arid mountain regions. Adaptation would be required, but her fundamental skills remained applicable. Local assets. 1 contact who can provide transportation and basic intelligence. Beyond that, you're on your own. As the aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude, Sarah reviewed the intelligence materials and began formulating preliminary plans. The target compound was situated on a river bend that provided natural protection while creating potential access routes for a determined operator. Why me specifically for this mission? Because you've proven you can succeed when conventional approaches fail. Because you operate effectively alone. And because the hostages deserve someone who won't give up when things get difficult. General Morrison's confidence was reassuring, but Sarah had learned to be realistic about operational challenges. Every mission carried risks that could turn success into disaster with a single mistake or unexpected development. Rules of engagement? Whatever is necessary to bring our people home safely. You have complete authority to use any means required. The remainder of the flight was spent reviewing intelligence, studying maps, and selecting equipment for jungle operations. Sarah's loadout would emphasize mobility and stealth over heavy firepower, with particular attention to communication gear that could function in challenging environmental conditions. Landing occurred at a small airfield in a neighboring country whose government provided covert support for American operations. The facility was basic but functional, with fuel and maintenance capabilities that suggested regular use for sensitive missions. General Morrison accompanied Sarah to a briefing room where additional intelligence awaited review. Real-time satellite imagery showed increased activity around the target compound, suggesting that time was running short for a successful rescue operation. Your local contact will meet you at 0600 tomorrow. From there, you're on your own until mission completion or extraction becomes necessary. Communication protocols? Emergency frequencies only. Unless you're in immediate danger, maintain radio silence until the hostages are secure. That evening, Sarah prepared her equipment while reviewing the mission plan one final time. Jungle operations required different considerations than mountain warfare, but the fundamental principles remained the same. Stealth, precision, and determination would determine success or failure. The local contact arrived precisely on schedule, driving a battered truck that looked like thousands of others in the region. He was a small, weathered man who spoke minimal English but clearly understood the dangers involved in their mission. "You ready?" he asked simply. Sarah shouldered her gear and followed him to the truck. Somewhere in the jungle ahead, 6 Americans were depending on her skills and determination for their survival. The mission was beginning, and failure was not an option. The drive through increasingly rough terrain took them deeper into a world where technology and civilization gave way to natural forces and human survival instincts. Sarah was returning to the environment where her training and experience would determine whether American citizens lived or died. Behind them, the airfield faded into tropical haze as they headed toward an uncertain confrontation with forces that understood jungle warfare better than any foreign operator. Success would require adapting quickly to new challenges while maintaining the focus that had made her previous mission successful. The truck bounced along rough roads that gradually became simple dirt tracks cutting through dense vegetation. Ahead lay the most challenging mission of Sarah's career, with stakes that made personal considerations irrelevant compared to the lives depending on her success. The dense jungle canopy blocked most of the morning sunlight as Sarah followed her local guide through increasingly difficult terrain. They had been walking for 3 hours since abandoning the truck at the end of the dirt road, and the humidity was already testing her endurance despite years of conditioning. Her guide, who called himself Miguel, moved through the jungle with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his entire life in this environment. He spoke little, communicating mostly through hand signals and occasional whispered warnings about dangerous plants or unstable ground. "Compound is 2 kilometers ahead," Miguel said during their first rest stop. "River makes big curve here. Guards patrol in boats every 2 hours." Sarah studied her map while drinking water and adjusting her equipment. The target compound was situated on high ground overlooking the river, providing excellent defensive positions while making covert approach extremely difficult. Satellite imagery had shown the basic layout, but ground-level reconnaissance would be essential for developing an effective assault plan. "How many guards total?" she asked. "Maybe 40, maybe 50. Hard to count. They change all the time." The numbers were manageable if she could avoid direct confrontation, but rescuing 6 civilians would require moving through the compound in ways that made detection almost inevitable. Success would depend on timing, surprise, and eliminating key threats before general alarm could be raised. Weapons: Kalashnikovs, some RPGs, 1 heavy machine gun on the main building. Nothing fancy, but they know how to use them. Miguel's assessment matched intelligence reports, confirming that the enemy relied on numbers and defensive positions rather than sophisticated equipment. Sarah's advanced weapons and training provided significant advantages, but only if she could use them effectively in the jungle environment. The approach to the observation position took another hour of careful movement through terrain that seemed designed to frustrate military operations. Thick vegetation limited visibility to a few meters in most directions, while the soft ground made silent movement extremely difficult. "There," Miguel whispered, pointing through the trees toward a slight rise overlooking the river. Sarah could see the compound clearly from their concealed position. The facility was larger than satellite images had suggested, consisting of multiple buildings connected by covered walkways. Guards were visible at several positions, their movements suggesting trained military experience rather than undisciplined militia fighters. "Where are the hostages held?" she asked, studying the layout through her spotting scope. "Main building, second floor. Windows have bars. Very hard to reach." The building Miguel indicated was the largest structure in the compound, positioned to provide maximum security while allowing commanders to observe all approaches. Getting inside undetected would require eliminating multiple guard positions while avoiding the patrols that moved constantly through the area. Sarah spent the next 4 hours conducting detailed surveillance, mapping guard rotations, identifying weapon positions, and calculating distances for potential sniper shots. The enemy was well organized and disciplined, maintaining constant communication and changing their patterns regularly to prevent predictable routines. As afternoon thunderstorms gathered overhead, she observed increased activity around the main building. Several vehicles arrived carrying men whose appearance and behavior suggested higher authority than the regular guards. Intelligence had indicated that political pressure was mounting for resolution of the hostage situation. "Bad men coming," Miguel observed, confirming her assessment. "They talk about moving the Americans tomorrow." Time was running out faster than anticipated. If the hostages were moved from this location, tracking them through the vast jungle would become nearly impossible. Sarah had to act tonight, despite having less preparation time than she preferred. The plan that emerged from her observations was necessarily complex. She would wait until the early morning hours when guard alertness was at its lowest, then eliminate key sentries before infiltrating the main building. The hostages would be extracted through a service entrance that offered the best route to the river extraction point. "Can you bring a boat to this position?" Sarah asked, pointing to a location downstream from the compound. "Yes, but very dangerous. Many guards on the river. Be there at 0400. If we're not there by 0500, leave without us." Miguel nodded grimly, understanding the implications of the timeline. Jungle operations allowed little margin for error, and delays often meant the difference between escape and capture. As darkness fell, Sarah began final preparations for the most challenging mission of her career. Her equipment was optimized for stealth and precision, including night vision gear, suppressed weapons, and communication devices that would function in the humid environment. The infiltration began at midnight with movement toward the compound perimeter. Progress was slow and deliberate, taking advantage of natural cover and the sound of nocturnal insects to mask any noise her movement might create. Every step was planned in advance, with fallback positions identified in case retreat became necessary. The first obstacle was a guard post positioned to monitor the main approach route. 2 sentries maintained watch from an elevated position that provided excellent visibility of the surrounding area. Eliminating them required careful positioning to ensure both targets could be engaged simultaneously. Sarah's first shot took the nearest guard in the head, dropping him instantly without sound. The second guard had only a moment to react before her follow-up shot ended his threat permanently. Both bodies were dragged into concealment to prevent discovery by subsequent patrols. Movement toward the main building required crossing 50 meters of open ground covered by searchlights that swept the area every few minutes. Sarah timed her advance to coincide with the gaps between light sweeps, reaching the building wall just as distant thunder announced the approaching storm. The service entrance was located exactly where intelligence had indicated, secured by a simple lock that yielded quickly to her lockpicking tools. The door opened silently, revealing a dark corridor that led toward the interior of the building. Sarah's night vision equipment allowed her to navigate effectively through the poorly lit building interior. She could hear voices from upper floors, speaking in the local language with occasional English words that suggested interrogation was in progress. The stairs to the second floor were positioned near the main entrance, requiring her to pass close to several guard positions. 2 fighters sat at a table playing cards, their weapons within easy reach, but their attention focused on the game. Sarah eliminated both men with swift, silent strikes before continuing upward. The second floor corridor was better lit, presenting greater challenges for covert movement. Sarah could hear American voices from behind a heavy wooden door at the far end of the hallway. 2 guards stood outside the door, armed with assault rifles, and clearly alert despite the late hour. Eliminating the guards required careful timing to prevent either one from raising an alarm. Sarah waited until both men were distracted by conversation before moving into position. Her suppressed pistol ended both threats with precisely aimed shots that made minimal noise. The hostage room was secured with multiple locks that required several minutes to overcome. Inside, she found all 6 Americans, bound and exhausted but alive and responsive. They recognized her immediately as American military despite her civilian clothing and jungle camouflage. "Who are you?" whispered Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the senior aid worker. "U.S. military. We're getting you out of here," Sarah replied quietly. "How many people in your rescue team?" asked another hostage. "Just me. We need to move fast and quiet. Can everyone walk?" The hostages were weak from poor food and limited water, but all confirmed they could handle the physical demands of an escape operation. Their captors had focused on psychological pressure rather than physical incapacitation, leaving them functional despite their ordeal. Sarah quickly cut their restraints while explaining the extraction plan. The route back through the building would be dangerous, but staying together was essential for maintaining control during the operation. "Stay close, follow my lead, and don't make any noise unless I tell you," she instructed. "Our lives depend on staying undetected until we reach the extraction point." The escape began smoothly as they moved back through the second-floor corridor toward the stairs. Sarah's knowledge of guard positions allowed them to avoid contact initially, but maintaining stealth with 6 additional people proved more challenging than her solo infiltration. The first alarm was raised by a guard who discovered the bodies at the card table. Radio chatter erupted throughout the compound as enemy forces realized their prisoners had escaped. Searchlights began systematic sweeps of all areas while armed teams moved to block potential escape routes. Sarah led the hostages through the service entrance and into the jungle, using her memorized knowledge of the terrain to stay ahead of pursuing forces. The thunderstorm that had been threatening all evening finally broke, providing both concealment and additional challenges for movement through the dense vegetation. "Stay together. Don't lose sight of the person in front of you," Sarah called over the sound of rain and thunder. The weather worked in their favor initially, masking the sound of their movement while making it difficult for enemy forces to coordinate pursuit operations. However, the hostages' lack of jungle experience became increasingly problematic as the terrain grew more difficult. "I can't keep up," gasped one of the nurses, stumbling over roots hidden in the darkness. Sarah had anticipated this problem and distributed energy bars and water to help maintain the group's strength. Progress was slower than planned, but they were making steady headway toward the extraction point. Enemy forces launched a coordinated search effort, using vehicles and boats to cover potential escape routes, while foot patrols swept through the jungle. Sarah could hear engines and voices growing closer as their pursuers narrowed the search area. "Boat coming up the river," Dr. Walsh reported, listening to the sound of an approaching engine. "Stay low and quiet. Let them pass." The enemy patrol boat moved slowly upstream, its searchlight probing the riverbank for signs of the escaped hostages. Sarah and her group remained motionless in the dense undergrowth until the threat passed. "How much further?" whispered one of the aid workers. "Half a kilometer. 20 more minutes if we stay together." The final approach to the extraction point required crossing an open area where recent logging had removed most of the natural cover. Enemy forces were concentrating their search in this direction, making detection increasingly likely. "Helicopter approaching from the south," reported Dr. Walsh, who had been monitoring sounds from that direction. The aircraft was still several minutes away, but its presence meant their escape window was closing rapidly. Sarah pushed the pace as much as possible while maintaining stealth and group cohesion. Miguel was waiting at the extraction point with a small boat that looked barely adequate for 7 people. His expression showed relief mixed with concern about the approaching enemy forces and the challenging river journey ahead. "Big storm coming," he warned. "River very dangerous tonight." "More dangerous than staying here," Sarah replied, helping the hostages into the boat. Enemy forces were closing from 3 directions when they pushed off from the riverbank. The boat was overloaded and difficult to control in the rough water created by the thunderstorm, but it provided their only escape route. "Helicopter overhead," shouted Miguel over the engine noise. The aircraft appeared through the rain clouds, its searchlight sweeping the river's surface in systematic patterns. Sarah distributed the hostages as low as possible in the boat, while Miguel used his knowledge of the river to stay in shadows along the shoreline. "Patrol boat coming upstream fast," Dr. Walsh reported, pointing toward lights approaching from around the river bend. Sarah readied her rifle while calculating distances and angles for defensive fire. The enemy boat was faster and better armed, but she had the advantage of knowing their approximate position while remaining hidden in darkness. The engagement began when the patrol boat's searchlight found their position. Sarah's first shots disabled the enemy vessel's engine, while Miguel used maximum throttle to escape downstream. Return fire struck the water around them without finding targets in the difficult conditions. "Everyone stay down," Sarah shouted as bullets passed overhead. The helicopter joined the pursuit, using its mounted weapons to spray the river's surface with automatic fire. Miguel's boat took several hits, but remained functional as they raced toward the extraction point where friendly forces would be waiting. "Bridge ahead," Miguel called out. "Very dangerous in this weather." The narrow bridge was barely visible through the rain, its stone supports creating deadly obstacles for boats attempting passage in rough water. Miguel's skill as a river pilot proved essential as he navigated the treacherous current while maintaining maximum speed. Enemy fire followed them until they passed beyond effective range, but the helicopter continued pursuit until they reached international waters where it finally turned back. The extraction boat appeared exactly on schedule, its crew immediately working to transfer the exhausted hostages to safety. Medical teams standing by called the boat's commander as Sarah helped Dr. Walsh aboard the larger vessel. The rescued aid workers were exhausted and traumatized, but otherwise in good condition considering their ordeal. Sarah remained with them during the initial medical examination, providing reassurance and answering questions about their escape. "How did you find us?" asked one of the nurses. "We never stopped looking," Sarah replied. The journey to safety took 4 hours through international waters that provided protection from pursuit. Sarah used the time to debrief the hostages about their captivity and gather intelligence that might prevent future incidents. "They were planning to move us tomorrow to a location deeper in the jungle," Dr. Walsh explained. "Someone was coming to negotiate our release, but they seemed more interested in making an example than reaching an agreement." "Any indication how they knew about your aid station?" "Too much detail about our operations and schedule. Someone was feeding them information about our movements." The pattern was becoming familiar. Sarah's missions seemed to involve situations where intelligence leaks had compromised American operations. The implications suggested systemic problems that went beyond isolated incidents. The boat docked at a secure facility where military medical personnel waited to examine the rescued hostages. Sarah remained in the background, officially invisible to the medical teams and debriefing specialists who surrounded the returning civilians. General Morrison appeared as the chaos began settling down. Her expression showed satisfaction with the mission's success, but also concern about the larger implications of another intelligence failure. "Excellent work," she said. 6 American lives saved because of your skills and dedication." "Thank you, ma'am. But we need to discuss the intelligence leaks. This is the second mission where enemy forces knew too much about our operations." "Agreed. That's actually why I wanted to speak with you privately." General Morrison led Sarah away from the docking area toward a secure building where they could discuss sensitive matters without interruption. The facility was clearly designed for covert operations, suggesting capabilities that existed outside normal military channels. "We've identified a pattern in these intelligence compromises. Someone with high-level access is selling information to hostile forces. Finding them requires someone who operates outside normal command structures." "What kind of operation are you proposing?" "Deep cover work. You would be assigned to investigate suspected individuals while maintaining your cover as a freelance security consultant. The mission could take months and would involve considerable personal risk." The proposal was intriguing, but also dangerous. Investigating intelligence leaks required access to sensitive information, and close contact with people who might be committing treason. Discovery could mean death rather than simple imprisonment. Why me specifically? Because you've proven you can operate independently and succeed in impossible situations. Because your official status allows access to information without raising suspicions. And because we trust you to put American lives ahead of political considerations. Sarah considered the implications carefully. Accepting would mean abandoning any hope of returning to normal civilian life and committing to a world of shadows and deception. Refusing would mean leaving the problem for others to solve while American lives remained at risk. I need complete operational authority and protection from political interference. Done. You'll report directly to me through secure channels. No one else will know about your real mission. Timeline. Open-ended. This investigation could take months or years depending on what you discover. The commitment was enormous, but the stakes were equally significant. Intelligence leaks had already compromised multiple operations and cost American lives. Without resolution, the problem would only get worse. What's my cover story? International security consultant with a specialty in hostage rescue and crisis management. Your recent successes provide perfect justification for high-level corporate and government contracts. General Morrison activated a laptop computer and began displaying the initial intelligence about suspected individuals. The list included military officers, intelligence analysts, and government officials who had access to the compromised information. We've narrowed the suspects to 12 individuals. Your job is to get close to them, assess their loyalty, and identify the source of the leaks. Sarah studied the photographs and background information for each suspect. They represented different levels of government and military hierarchy, making the investigation complex and potentially dangerous. Resources, unlimited budget, complete equipment access, and backup support if situations become dangerous. You'll also have new identity documents that support your cover story. When do I start? Immediately. Your first target is Colonel Robert Harrison, Army Intelligence. He's attending a security conference in Washington next week where you'll make initial contact. The transformation from rescue operative to counterintelligence investigator would require adapting to a completely different type of mission. Instead of direct action and clear objectives, she would be entering a world of subtle manipulation and long-term deception. I'll need time to study the files and prepare for the assignment. Of course, take as long as necessary. The stakes are too high for anything less than perfect preparation. Over the following days, Sarah immersed herself in the intelligence files while developing her cover identity. The fictitious security consultant had an impressive but unverifiable background that would justify her presence in high-level security circles. The transformation included new appearance elements that subtly changed her overall look without obvious disguise. Professional clothing, updated hairstyle, and refined mannerisms created the image of a successful business consultant rather than a military operator. Colonel Harrison's background suggested a dedicated officer whose recent financial difficulties might make him vulnerable to enemy recruitment. His access to sensitive intelligence made him a prime suspect, but proving his guilt would require careful investigation over an extended period. The security conference in Washington provided the perfect opportunity for initial contact. Sarah attended as the representative of a private security firm seeking government contracts, a role that justified her interest in military personnel and classified projects. Colonel Harrison, I'm Sarah Mitchell from International Risk Solutions. I've heard excellent things about your work in intelligence analysis. The initial conversation was carefully casual, focusing on professional topics that allowed Sarah to assess his personality and motivations. Harrison was charming and knowledgeable, but something in his demeanor suggested hidden stress that might indicate guilty knowledge. Your company handles some interesting projects, Harrison observed. I'd love to hear more about your methodology. Perhaps we could discuss it over dinner sometime. I'm always interested in learning from experienced military professionals. The invitation was accepted, beginning a relationship that would allow Sarah to investigate his activities while maintaining her cover story. Success would require balancing suspicion with friendship over many months of careful observation. As she left the conference, Sarah reflected on the enormous task ahead. Somewhere among the suspects was a traitor whose actions had already cost American lives, and would continue causing damage until exposed. Finding them would require patience, skill, and the ability to maintain her cover while gathering evidence. The hotel room that night became her planning center as she reviewed intelligence files and prepared for long-term operations. Maps, photographs, and background reports covered every surface, creating a comprehensive picture of the investigation ahead. Her phone rang as she was organizing the materials. The caller ID showed General Morrison's secure number, suggesting new developments in the case. "Sarah, we have another situation. Different location, but the same intelligence leak pattern. How quickly can you be ready for deployment? Where and when?" "Eastern Europe. American military advisors have been captured, and the enemy knew exactly where to find them. We need immediate rescue operations while you continue the investigation." The dual mission requirements were challenging, but manageable. Sarah had proven her ability to handle complex operations while maintaining multiple objectives simultaneously. "I'll be ready in 2 hours." "Excellent. This time you'll have backup support. The situation is too dangerous for solo operations." The promise of support was reassuring, but Sarah knew the ultimate responsibility would still rest on her shoulders. American lives were at stake, and failure was not acceptable regardless of the obstacles involved. As she packed her gear for another dangerous mission, Sarah considered how dramatically her life had changed since leaving the military in disgrace. The organization that had thrown her away now depended entirely on her skills and dedication for missions that conventional forces couldn't handle. The transformation from discarded soldier to essential asset was complete. Colonel Hayes had been right when he said this wasn't the end of her story. Instead, it was the beginning of something far more important than anything she had accomplished during her official military career. The aircraft waiting at the private airfield would take her toward another confrontation with enemies who thought they understood American capabilities. They were about to learn that some soldiers never stopped fighting, even when the fight took them far beyond traditional battlefields. Sarah Mitchell was no longer the sniper they had thrown out into the storm. She had become something far more dangerous, a protector of American lives who operated without political constraints or bureaucratic limitations. The enemies who had celebrated her dismissal were about to discover their mistake. The storm that had driven her from military service had forged her into exactly what America needed when conventional solutions failed. She was returning to the fight, and this time she would be leading from the front with the full backing of people who understood her true value. The journey ahead would be long and dangerous, but Sarah faced it with confidence born from proven success. She had saved Navy SEALs and aid workers when everyone else had given up hope. Now she would hunt down traitors while continuing to rescue Americans in situations that demanded unconventional solutions. The aircraft climbed toward cruising altitude as darkness fell over the American landscape. Below, millions of people slept safely because dedicated professionals stood watch against threats they would never know existed. Sarah was returning to that watch, carrying the skills and determination that made her irreplaceable when American lives hung in the balance. Her military career had ended in political disgrace, but her true service to country was just beginning. The elite sniper they had thrown away was coming back to lead operations that would prove her worth beyond any doubt. The storm was over, and Sarah Mitchell was finally home where she belonged.